Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you this morning. Music survives and thrives not on the basis of academics, but on listenership. This is the angle of my talk today. In 1964, a group of well known musicologists, under the leadership of the late Dr. Jose Maceda, gathered in the Philippines to discuss about sound and its relationship to nations and societies. Dr. Maceda published the conference papers in 1966 as The Musics of Asia. Dr. Maceda was my teacher and also to many others in Thailand. A generation later, it set into motion a series of expensive musicology projects in Asean. The projects tried to respond to what these pioneer musicologists stated, issues about pitch and intonation in music that had to be addressed. The issues around listenership was utmost in the minds of music educators. It's about how you affect the listeners. Did you notice that there is a plural in the word musics? It is a grammar mistake. If you ask Oxford and Cambridge or any other institutions following the Uxbridge formula of education, the answer would be yes, without any hesitation. Nevertheless, the mix of high level musicologists, big names, agreed to publish it with that word in plural. And that is why I admire that generation of musicologists. Dr. Maceda actually devoted his life and left a legacy in words, sound, music analysis, and music compositions that explores ways to present the fundamental elements of Filipino music to the generations that follow. This set of scales, or better described as the intonational systems, show the estimated pitch values. It is not a quantized or scientifically researched and verified graphic. The Thai scale as it appears in this chart was published by Prachand Duriyang and Vishnutep Silapa. Likewise, in Indian music, it cannot be described in one line. In this graphic, I estimated it using the Indian raga Desh, which I learned as a North Indian raga during my days when I played the sitar. The Indian music has versions and then it has versions of versions. You need to study the system itself. Except for the Western system, the rest in the chart are approximations of what the different pitch levels are. What the pitch levels were to Asia, especially to Dr. Tran Ban Khe of Vietnam and Dr. Yap Kuns, they presented in the best way they could do it at that time. And I think they did a heroic job to show us that there was a fundamental difference in the approach to the tonal systems. Dr. Tran mapped out the complex modes and variations of the Vietnamese musical system. He could sing them too at a moment's notice. Likewise, the late Dr. Yap Kuns did the same for Indonesia. The Dutch government has since set up a museum in Amsterdam where his work and many artifacts from his work in Indonesia are displayed there, including the earliest known cylinder recordings. So I would say if there's extensive enough research coming from all over the world for your own musical systems, because as far as I know, the Germans have got a lot of collections and they started recording much earlier than anybody else. So these libraries are quite important, and it is at institutional level that you make this kind of discussion. I would say the UNESCO award to Gamelan is the best thing that has happened in the last few months. And I would like to highlight the late Dr. R. Supanga from Indonesia, a very good friend of mine, and he was part of that first project we had in Banawe in 1989. I'll come to that soon. Dr. Supanga played a central role in ensuring Indonesia stayed on course. And in particular, he concentrated on the Karawitin form, which is fundamental to a lot of Indonesian instrumental as well as song repertoire. Pitch migration occurs over time when music emissions from radio, television, performances, recordings, and now the internet begin to default to one musical system to engage their listeners. This is something the young musicians in this region have to understand. The usual pitch migration is mainly to the Western tertian system. There was an urgency in 1964 at this conference to address this.
These are a good of good nice sticks. So show that.
Pitch migration opened the way for ASEAN to work on this issue of intonation. Most of us agreed with Dr. Maseda that Asian music would change, but how and when and why and what were left to a future time. This cannot be the way anymore. It has to be done now. Otherwise, we will have musicologists saying the same thing generation after generation and leaving the difficult aspects of intonation as the major pitch migration issue that we will regret in future generations. The point that was made in 1966 by inference rather than science was that pitch makes the fundamental difference to all other musical elements that go into making any music real and recognizable, the other elements being rhythm, timbre, form, and aesthetics. If musicology loses out to mass movements, then it is over as a profession. The ASEAN Project publications are now being shown on the screen. 1989 ASEAN Composers Workshop in the Philippines, 1993 ASEAN Forum Papers in Singapore, 1985 Music in ASEAN for Music Educators. The plural appears again in many of these titles. 1997 ASEAN Composers Forum in Thailand, 2003 Sonic Orders in ASEAN Music, a field to laboratory investigation done in Singapore. Most of the front titles use the plural, musics. It appears that the Maseda audacity in grammar was also passed down to many of us. These projects followed up on the cardinal points made in the 1964 conference. The fact that composers were brought into the fold as interpreters of music was very important. Dr. Maseda's point that sound objects are important must always be remembered, so do not throw away recordings and notes from the past. Do not ignore them. The pristine musical systems of Asia were and still are in danger of going extinct. An example can be found in Utrecht Music College in Argentina. They have their own pedagogy based on an integrated design initiated and still led by the man who led the idea 3 decades ago, Professor Alejandro Iglesias. It has trained musicologists, many of whom are now his staff. The cohort are multifaceted with quite varied talents and cross-disciplinary experiences. Their learning methodology lies in archaeology and its scientific tools to dig up the ground so that they could learn the past, and trying to remain true to what they see in the archaeological sites and using their imagination to recreate some of it, both past and present and future altogether. The impact of 1964 on ASEAN and the new series of projects were important in the sense that if you look at the first project in the Ifugao music in the mountains of Banawe in North Luzon, here there was a very nice mix of all of us working with actual practitioners in their environment. We learned how their music was preserved and what it was facing in terms of erosion and what I call interfacing. They would be able to appear in their tribal costumes and perform the music, and then in the next instance you'll be finding them in Western dress out in the cities living a modern life. They are still preserving their music. In 1993, under the second project, the forum. I called it Evolving Traditions because I knew everything was evolving. But you can hear the music that I'm playing in the background is alive today. And you can hear the intonation, the inflexes are not Western. And a group that holds the key to that music is preserving that music despite the pressure to evolve into something else. Forum papers gave different countries a chance to understand the wide array of Singapore traditional music. And for Singapore, where I gave the broad spectrum of what we had, what we needed to do to protect international principles. After these two projects, a lot of teachers in Asean began to ask for a book which they could use in their music education classes. And the Philippines came out with a book which they called The Musics of ASEAN. So you can see The Musics of Asia and The Musics of ASEAN now, two complementary books. I would like to highlight Midi, Musical Instruments Digital Interface, because by the time this book came out in the mid-80s, Midi had become a very forceful piece of technology worldwide. I identified that there was a need of upgrading the Midi standard to version 2 because it was just working on the purest measurements of the Western system. And Midi had only 127 parameters for programming. In 1988, I decided to take on a challenge to write a work for the opening of the first Singapore Arts Festival. You can see there was quite a big Midi configuration that we had to set up. We're lucky that industry supported it. And the work was called the Merlion Odyssey, and we had to do a number of things there.
The Centre's Electronic Music Lab has been working on a format over a number of years and has now perfected it. Two powerful computers translate the program into real sounds. They are linked to 18 generators which are capable of producing 64 different sounds. What more can computers do?
The sounds that we get from any source can be put digitally into the tone generators and then used via computers. This technology will allow limitless avenue for creativity.
A total of 50 NUS students and staff are practicing and improving daily. Synthicom will be staged on 2 nights next Saturday and Sunday at the Singapore Conference Hall. Together with dances and lighting special effects, it promises to keep both young and old spellbound.
The experience of this Midi composition and performance was that the quantization of the intervals of Asian music or the musical systems of ASEAN was even more important. The next big project was in Thailand in 1997, the third Composers Forum, and it was actually the last. Thailand did a wonderful job because they tried to cater for music education as well as the profession of musicology and composition too. And the project was very well run, but I think ASEAN had to divert its funds anyway. I did put up a proposal to have some funds to do sonic orders by then. And to my surprise, it was approved straight away. But it took 12 years to get the money. But in that 12 years, it gave me a lot of time to study both the Eastern and Western musical systems and also complete a PhD based on that, which I angled towards laboratory-based teaching and learning. So you could combine all musicology and music performance, pedagogy, and the application of technology too. The sum total of it was that finally the project started 1998, and it took about 5 years to complete. That was the sonic orders in ASEAN musics. Sonic orders had two objectives. One was to test a methodology with the engineering faculty of the National University of Singapore to see if we could find a way that was scientifically palatable to measure pitch intervals in stages. And I had many discussions with the professor there, And finally, they accepted to take on that responsibility. The second objective was to try and find a way to embed technology into pedagogy. And at that point in time, I was trying to help students in the Singapore Management University to apply their text and their voice to the sound itself. And I had to do many examples, but the sum total of it was that the Singapore Management University built quite a fantastic laboratory. And you see that in the graphic here. I don't have time to give you details on this laboratory, but it could do everything that I wanted to do. And I spent 8 years teaching the students there how to write to the sound using many technologies. Now today that has morphed into the graphic you see. You will see it as TMAL-P. That's timeline, music annotation, library and laboratory in one L. It's a pedagogy. P is for pedagogy. The top line, you see all the calculating systems. You see, so those are the measures that I use to measure transmissions from radio, television, so on, so on. The semicircle, the colorful line, is the app which is available today to place your text and all the collaterals that you need to write your article and so forth into this app. And then the bottom line is the management of the server. All of this is based in the server so that you will protect the library. That is one of the objectives. So Atali can only be right if countries will fully neglect their musical cultures through lack of insight into music pedagogy. That is basically the angle in Atali's book, and I would support it 100%. Now, ethnomusicology really grew out of a descriptive method as opposed to the scientific method of the Germans. They clashed in the early 20th century, and the 1964 conference was trying hard to bring science into the study. Although Dr. Maceda preferred to just work in the field because he knew that would take his lifetime, he never once said anything against science, although I brought it up many times. He would sometimes get irritated with me, but I'm glad that at least he listened. There is a need to look at the German scientific method. They had the Alice measuring system at that time. The science is important today. I would like to highlight, just before I end, two important new developments by a very young man, Khayyam Alami, who has used AI to create a dual software which could bypass the measuring of intervals.
Hi, I'm Khayyam Alami, and this is Apotome, designed to be used with its sister application Lima, another browser-based application that allows you to create your own tuning systems or explore existing ones. These two apps are browser-based and designed to explore and create with microtonal tuning systems.
The other invention is analog, and it's called the fluid piano.
I'm sitting in front of the first ever fluid piano. It's a totally acoustic piano. There are no electronics, and that's the significance of it. It's a totally acoustic instrument. The reason it's called the fluid piano is that it has microtonal tuning on every single note. That means that you can change the tuning on each note individually, independently, separately, so that you're no longer restricted to purely Western tuning.
Thank you for your attention. All the books that I referred to from 1966 to 2003 will be available as PDF copies. Just send an email to me, sonicasia@icloud.com, and my best wishes for a very good conference. Khop khun krap.